Hi there. Welcome along to this introduction to the SOMI Music Stories for Juniors. I've got Stuart Manins with me. He's the author of the series, of course, and we're going to tap into his expertise in the next quarter of an hour or so. And I've got 3 questions prepared for Stuart, and without any further ado, I'm going to bring those questions up on screen. And what we can see here is the SOMI icons, and we're going to perhaps refer back to some of the stories as Stuart does the answer. But the very first question is, I've been intrigued to know what the main features are that you want to get over with the SOMI stories, Stuart. So over to you. Talk us through, please.
Sure, and good morning. I wanted to have my focus in helping my students in music education concentrate on what was most important to do in music teaching at what time. And from a look at the research, worldwide research on how children learn music, I nailed things down, reduced things to 2: to sing in tune and move in time. But I wanted to do it when it really mattered. And the research is overwhelming in this. It's in early childhood, in the years up to 8 years old. And I wanted to do it in the best way to get the best results. And for me, that's at that stage, children prefer to work in an unstructured, multidisciplinary approach. They want to move and sing and play and listen and experiment and create, but let it lead to reading and writing, all the things they're doing in the other parts of their education program at school.
So, Stuart, the next question sort of follows on from that. But just staying with that first answer, it's really about moving in time and singing in tune. So you've got all those other enculturation things going on, but that's perhaps the main focus for you: moving in time, singing in tune. Does that sound about how it should be?
That's exactly right, with one qualification, David. If you look at those 2 things and how they develop in children, say, sent on about 6 years old, that was my focus group in trialing all this material. There's a difference. Children will all learn to move in time eventually, despite programs in schools. But not all children will sing in tune. So that's why I start the series with focus on the singing the so-mi interval, which research says in our society, more children sing more easily in tune than other intervals. That's the interval they naturally sing at play. I'm the king of the castle, you're the dirty rascal.
That's great. The fact that it's occurring naturally in school playgrounds and in all sorts of ways means that the learning is in some ways exploring what they already know. And that leads to the second area outside of formal classrooms. What can ordinary people, parents, grandparents, church groups that are running Sunday schools, what can we do to reinforce this set of learning outcomes that you've so carefully developed?
It's a good question. I thought about that. And that's one of the reasons why I chose stories as the medium through which I do this exploration of musical technique teaching. I'm trying to help children sing in tune and move in time in early childhood. Now, along the corridor from where I worked were people involved in teaching reading in schools, and they had a reputation of being more successful than anyone else in the English-speaking world, which was an incredible advantage for me. So I went along to see how they taught reading, and I discovered a process was being used called the shared book. You took a book with a good story. You had a group of 6-year-olds or whatever, can be anywhere from 4 to 8-year-olds, on a mat in front of you, and the story's illustrated. It only takes a few minutes to read, 4 or 5 minutes. And I saw them using this approach. First of all, they read to children. When you read a story for the first time to children, children don't respond other than just look in amazement at you. If it's a good story, they'll ask for it again. The next stage was when they asked for it again, to invite them to participate with you, to make the noises that are there, jump around if they want to. It's not dangerous to do that. I never found control going. So you read to children, you invite them to join in with you, and if you do that often enough, you will find there are big chunks of the story that they're able to read on their own, and that leads to an independent reading technique. Now, I used that system of the shared book with my stories.
Right. Now, you and I have both done a couple of these stories in church contexts, and I particularly remember the Somi and the spider story, where you had not only the children but the adults weaving a large spider web down in the sanctuary of the church to illustrate part of the story. But the key thing in the story was, of course, getting across that basic Somi interval. And each of these books has a pretty key step that you want to get across. Each story has a key step. And it's really parents, grandparents, church groups, whatever, being able to understand what the key step is for involving the kids. Is that right?
Yes, that's true.
And we've developed, or rather you've developed, and I've put up the set of teaching notes that goes alongside of each story, so that there's a resource, a ready resource there, if a parent or grandparent wants to do a little bit extra. So you had great success in getting these stories out and produced and so on, but I'm wondering what happens as you go through the stories. I put them out at the rate of 1 a week, publishing them so that they're sort of coming out in a serial form. But in your opinion, you might need less time or more time to deal with each story?
Well, it's definitely going to be more time. When I worked with children with these, I had to fight the normal expectation that another story is just sequentially there and doesn't require necessarily the personalization of the first story. By personalization, I mean to do the musical things that I'm trying to teach. In the first book, it's just to be aware of sounds around about us. In the second book, and this is written on the front cover of the book, it's to be aware of rather more subtle sounds, sounds inside us, like the sound of our breathing. And this all led up to increasing the ability to be aware of the particular sound of the descending minor third. So me, which is the name of the character.
One of the things that fascinated me was the way in which the ability to put the story and produce like the police siren and So Me Goes Missing, da, 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 and to be actually sort of laying the foundation for the reading of music.
Yeah, I've forgotten what you asked because I was so impressed. You did the da-da so beautifully in tune, David. And you're the person that tells me you don't sing in tune. In that context, there you did it perfectly. Now that
Well, I'm quite
really
amazed by that, because I would have said I hadn't sung the minor third. I'd sung it as a major.
no,
So I'm not.
da da is a minor third. Da dee dee so mi do. No, you did it perfectly, and I think that illustrates something about you weren't thinking about singing a minor third. You were just thinking about the police car siren. Da 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 da. And that's what I want to happen with kids. They don't think of this as a musical skill. They relate it to something that produces it. And that's exactly the process. And that's why I use so many songs. And singing games are marvelous for children at this age.
What I've noticed, Stuart, is that with our little grandson Jack, when we play the stories, he has become alert to not only the timbre of your voice reading, but he's become alert to the actual interval. So I can go in and whistle, and instantly he recognizes. Now he's 6 months old, and so I think there's a kind of a very clear foundation being laid, that's intuitive in the very early, very junior child. They hear these sounds, they're fascinated by them. Stuart, I want to just deviate with one question that we haven't explored yet. These stories are great in their own right as stories, leaving aside moving in time and singing in tune.
Right.
The Somi and the Boss, for example, or Somi in Space. The kids can get into them, even though these stories were written for 20, 25 years ago.
Yeah, well, this is what I hoped would happen. I call this guarding against people abusing the system. Not understanding what I'm doing. Even if a parent didn't understand what I'm doing, and a child doesn't understand what I'm doing, the story ought to stand on its own 2 feet. And I never considered a story finished until in the trialing, children liked it for its own sake. That means even though you haven't processed all the musical potential of the story, you can go on to the next one. But of course, you'll get so much more from it if you work out the implications of what I'm trying to teach. And to help do that, I produced those activity sheets. Parents used to say to me, when do I go on to the next story? And I would say, okay, I'll write you a set of activities you can do with the children. And when they can do all those things, they're ready for the next story.
Oh, that's excellent, because very soon we'll have published the entire set of 12, and I've been asking you in the background what next, what resources after the Somi series finishes, but actually it's a series that can stand a long productive period, not just the 12 weeks that we've been publishing them.
Oh yes, in the beginning classes at school, 5 and 6 year olds, I would spend up to a term, that's 10 weeks, on one book before I felt I went on from book 1 to book 2 or so on, 2 to 3.
In fact, the series is written for ages 5 to 8, meaning that it could be applicable, for other stages of learning in that time, but it may take some years to work through the Somi series.
Yes, and you mentioned your grandson, I think, Jack, was it?
Yes.
In his first year. It thrilled me to see that although I planned the stories for the youngest children of the students I was teaching at Teachers College, and that was kindergarten, 4 years old. So I had 4 and 5 year olds and 6 year olds in my mind when I wrote them. But I find that those sounds are fascinating to children right from their earliest time. In fact, there's a whole lot of research on prenatal responses to music. Children, before they're born, will move to timbre, tone, colour, volume, and pitch and duration, and show likeness or dislikeness, liking or disliking for these things.
One of the things I noticed with my granddaughter Lily, who's 3.5, she loves the stories not only for their rhythm, their musicality, but she loves them as stories, as literature. And she's at that particular age where children have to have the stories said exactly, and so it's been a joy for us as grandparents to be able to provide a little resource.
Well, Stuart, imagine what joy there is for me when I hear that story.
Stuart, just as a kind of a wind up, there may be some principles that you would like to just briefly touch on before we bring our live on air to a close. Are there any further principles that you'd like to elucidate?
Well, sure. There's one area I'd like to extend, and that was, you said, where does this lead to? And I made a primary answer to that by saying, well, one book leads to the other. Although with rhythm, I think it's in books 10 and 11, you can start them anywhere you like. I've explained before that I start with the pitch discrimination because that's the more likely one to be ignored with teachers. So there's where do I go next? You go to the next book, and I've commented on that. Now, when you get to the end of this time, the 8-year-olds, there's a change in the kind of way children prefer to learn. If you like to think of that first stage up to 8 as right brain or fanciful learning. Children up to that age are not interested so much in facts, but in fantasy and creativity and doing lots of different things laterally. It's after that period that they become focused, and we go into what some people call a left brain preference. So at the end of this series, I think children are beautifully prepared to do what many parents start with, and that's link them up with an instrument. This is where the early violin classes of Suzuki start from. This is where people take their children at the earliest stage to learn the piano. Now, if they could have this background, which is a musical one rather than a particularly technical one on an instrument, they can then start to learn the piano differently from playing the typewriter. I want them to look at notes in front of them and hear them in their heads and then produce them on an instrument. And perhaps the last point I might like to make is this, and it has to do with my feeling of your importance as a parent or a teacher. I can produce a program like this, and it can give good results in the normal schools that it was trialed at first. But the other great determinant of your child's success is the atmosphere, the enculturation you provide in your own home. That in itself will produce the kinds of things I'm looking for. So understand how important it is for you to have music in the home, for you to sing, for you to do all the things that they're doing with them. And with the two of us working together, we can change the world.
Well, there's something in that. I do believe very strongly that the processes of enculturation pick up not only on the wider values, the society, the the extended family, but also very much within the actual physical home. So if the parents love music, love singing, love dancing, whatever, then the children will have that as an automatic backdrop in their lives. Stuart, you've provided some fascinating insights for us. I'm ever so grateful. And I think on that note, we'll say thanks very much for coming in to this live on air with me.
It's been a great pleasure.